It's a cold fall night in the 1870s, somewhere in Arkansas. The stars shine brightly above you as you run through the dark forest. Why? Because you're running from the most feared lawman in the Wild West. You've heard stories about this man and how he never gives up and how he's already arrested over 1,000 outlaws, and you don't want to be next. But what if I told you America's greatest frontier lawman wasn't who Hollywood led you to believe? The man hunting you down isn't your typical white cowboy from the movies. He's a former slave turned hero. This is the story of Bass Reeves, the first Black Deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River, and once he's on your trail, there's nowhere to hide. Bass Reeves was born into slavery on July 1838 in Crawford County, Arkansas. Think about that again. He began life as someone else's property. As a young boy, he was forced to work for a white family named Reeves. He didn't even get to choose his own name, but he was named after his grandfather, Bass Washington, and took the surname of his master, William Steele Reeves. Life as a slave meant hard work from sunrise to sunset. Young Bass started as a stable boy, caring for horses and cleaning stables. Then he learned to be a blacksmith, hammering hot metal into tools and horseshoes. The work built his strength, muscles that would later help him in his law career. As he grew older, he became a servant to George Reeves, his master's son. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Bass had to follow George Reeves, who became a Confederate colonel fighting to keep slavery legal. Bass was forced to fight in battles like Pea Ridge in March 1862. Imagine being made to fight for the side that wanted to keep you in chains. But something happened that would change Bass's life forever. What would drive a man born into bondage to risk his life by striking his master and fleeing into the unknown? When racism turns skin color into a crime, even dreaming of liberty becomes an act of rebellion. One night, Bass and George Reeves were playing cards. They got into a fight, and guess what Bass did? He punched his master in the face. This was a death sentence for a slave. In those days, a black man who struck a white man could be murdered and even hanged from a tree without a trial. Bass knew he had to run, or he would be killed. So, in the dead of night, with only the clothes on his back and a desperate plan, Bass escaped north to Indian Territory, what we now call Oklahoma. The journey was dangerous. Slave catchers with dogs would be hunting him. One wrong step could mean capture or death. He found sanctuary with Native American tribes like the Cherokee, Seminole, and Creek. These tribes often welcomed runaway slaves as they shared a common enemy in white settlers who had taken their lands. Bass learned their languages and ways of life. He learned to hunt, track, and survive in the wilderness. He became familiar with every creek, hill, and trail in the territory, knowledge that would serve him well later. For the first time in his life, Bass was free. He could decide when to wake up, what work to do, and where to go. He could look at the stars at night without fear of punishment. He could be a man, not property. When slavery ended after the Civil War with the 13th Amendment in 1865, Bass settled down as a farmer in Arkansas. He married a woman named Nellie Jenny from Texas, and they had 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. They worked the land near Van Buren, Arkansas, growing crops and raising their family. Bass built a small house with his own hands, working from sunrise to sunset to provide for his growing family. But life wasn't easy for black families in the South after the war. Bass and his family faced challenges that white farmers didn't have to worry about. At first, things looked promising for freed slaves. The government set up the Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves adjust to freedom. By 1870, more than 240,000 black children were attending school. Black men could vote thanks to the 15th Amendment. Some black Americans were even elected to Congress. Bass might have hoped his children would grow up in a better world than he had. Perhaps he dreamed they would learn to read and write, skills he never had the chance to develop. Maybe he thought they could vote, own land, and live free from fear. But when federal troops left the South, everything changed. White Southerners who had fought for the Confederacy returned to power. They made new laws called Jim Crow laws, and that stopped black people from voting, testifying in court against white people, going to school, or traveling freely. Imagine not being able to drink from the same water fountain as your neighbor just because your skin was a different color. Imagine being arrested for walking alone on a public road. Imagine living in fear that a mob might burn your house down because you were too successful or didn't know your place. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan rode at night, wearing white hoods and carrying torches. They attacked black people who tried to live freely, burning homes, beating men, and hanging people from trees. A black man who looked a white person in the eye or who was accused of a crime could be killed by a lynch mob with no trial and no justice. In this dangerous world, Bass Reeves had a special talent. He knew Indian territory better than almost anyone. He could speak several native languages and had friendly relationships with many tribal members. And this territory was the wildest, most lawless place in America, a place where criminals ran to hide. It was so dangerous that a historian called it like Afghanistan. You could lose your life over your hat, your horse, your gun, your woman, any damn thing. Outlaws, murderers, horse thieves, and bandits of all kinds hid in the hills and forests. Gangs terrorized settlers. Lawmen who ventured into the territory often didn't come back alive. Did you dare to bring law to a place where lawmen were killed more than anywhere else in America? When U.S. Marshals from Van Buren needed guides to help them navigate the dangerous Indian territory, they turned to Bass. He knew every trail, creek, and hideout. He could find his way through the wilderness and darkness. He knew which tribes were friendly and which weren't. And most importantly, he wasn't afraid. In 1875, a strict new judge named Isaac Parker was appointed to bring order to Indian territory. They called him the hanging judge because he sent so many criminals to the gallows. During his time on the bench, he sentenced 160 people to death, and 79 of them were actually executed. Judge Parker believed that harsh punishment was the only way to tame the lawless territory. When Judge Parker arrived, he found a territory overrun with criminals, murderers, rapists, thieves, and outlaws of all kinds, hid in the hills and forests, knowing that the law couldn't touch them there. The few lawmen brave enough to enter the territory were often outnumbered and outgunned. Judge Parker needed brave men to track down outlaws, and he ordered his U.S. Marshal, James Fagan, to hire 200 deputies. Fagan had heard about Bass Reeves and his knowledge of the territory. Despite racial prejudice that might have kept other black men from such a job, Bass's skills were too valuable to ignore. Bass became a deputy U.S. Marshal, one of the first black men to hold such a position west of the Mississippi. Though he wasn't the first black lawman in America, he would become the greatest. At 6 feet 2 inches tall with a big handlebar mustache, he cut an impressive figure. His black Stetson hat and polished boots became his trademark. He was an excellent rider and shooter, skills he had developed during his years of hunting and his time in the Civil War. His blacksmith work and farming had made him incredibly strong, able to lift heavy loads and endure long days in the saddle. And his record was just incredible. Over his 32-year career, from 1875 to 1907, he arrested more than 3,000 criminals. That's an average of about 94 arrests every year, and he killed 14 outlaws in self-defense. Amazingly, he was never seriously wounded, though his hat was shot through several times. Some folks joked that Bass's hatmaker must have been a rich man. Have you ever wondered what kinds of dangerous outlaws and incredible situations did Bass Reeves face during his legendary career? Once, Bass was tracking 2 horse thieves named Frank Buck and John Bruner. 2 men offered to guide him through the territory, but here's the twist. These helpful guides were actually Buck and Bruner themselves. They probably thought this was the perfect way to avoid being caught, that is, stay close to the lawman and lead him away from their trail. While camping for dinner, Bass noticed one of the men reaching for his pistol. Quick as lightning, Bass grabbed the man's pistol and pulled his own. The other criminal tried to shoot Bass from behind, but Bass turned and shot him dead. The first man, now disarmed, was taken into custody. How would you escape if you were surrounded by outlaws with guns pointed at you? Another time, Bass was trapped by the notorious Brunter brothers, a gang of outlaws who had terrorized the territory for years. They had him at gunpoint, laughing and taunting him. They thought they had the famous indomitable Marshal at their mercy, but Bass remained calm. Cool as ice, he asked them for the date. When they asked why, he said he needed to date their arrest papers properly because they were coming with him, dead or alive. The brothers laughed at his boldness, and in that moment of distraction, Bass made his move. He pushed one gun aside, drew his own weapon faster than they could react, and shot 2 brothers dead. The third was either arrested or knocked unconscious with his own gun. This wasn't just luck, but Bass had trained himself to remain calm in dangerous situations. He knew that fear could cloud judgment and slow reactions. By staying calm and waiting for the right moment, he turned what could have been his death into a victory for justice. Bass was also a master of disguise. Once, he needed to catch 2 outlaws hiding at their mother's house. These men were dangerous, known for shooting at lawmen on sight. Walking up to the house would be too dangerous, so Bass hatched a clever plan. He dirtied his clothes, put on old shoes, and shot 3 holes in his hat to make it look like he'd barely escaped from a shootout. He changed his usual dignified appearance into that of a ragged, desperate man. He walked 28 miles to the cabin and knocked on the door, pretending to be an outlaw running from the law. He told a convincing story about being hunted by marshals, saying he was thirsty, hungry, and needed a place to hide. The mother believed his act completely and took him in, feeding him and letting him rest. When her criminal sons arrived that night, she whistled a signal to let them know it was safe to come inside. They had no idea who was waiting for them inside their own home. Bass arrested them while they slept and handcuffed them securely. When his fellow marshals arrived the next morning, they found Bass keeping watch over the two notorious outlaws. Without firing a shot or risking anyone's life, Bass had captured two dangerous men and collected a huge reward of $5,000. As Bass continued his work year after year, his fame spread throughout the territory. Newspapers wrote stories about his exploits. People told tales of his courage and cleverness around campfires. His name became synonymous with justice in a land where justice was rare. Bass became so famous that just his name was enough to scare criminals. In 1903, a man named Jerry McIntosh set his wife on fire during a drunken rage. She survived, but was badly burned. McIntosh ran away, knowing that such a terrible crime would bring serious punishment. While on the run, McIntosh had a nightmare that Bass Reeves found him hiding in the brush. In the dream, McIntosh tried to run, but Bass shot him dead. When he woke up, he was so frightened by the dream that he turned himself into the local authorities. The dream of Bass Reeves was scarier than facing real justice, and in the most unexpected twist of his career, Bass arrested his own son, Benny, for murdering his wife. Imagine the heartbreak of a father placing his own son in handcuffs, torn between duty and love. When Bass was given the warrant for his son's arrest, his boss suggested sending another deputy. Bass quietly said, "Give me the writ." He tracked down his son, arrested him, and watched as he was sentenced to life in prison. Bass's career wasn't perfect. In 1884, his camp cook, William Leach, was accidentally killed when Bass's gun went off while he was cleaning it. At first, it was ruled an accident, and no charges were filed. But 2 years later, a former Confederate soldier became the local prosecutor and charged Bass with murder. Bass was stripped of his badge and jailed for 3 months. Eventually, he was found not guilty, but the legal costs ruined him financially. He had to sell his home to pay his lawyers. Many believed the charges were about race, not justice, but a way to bring down a black man who had risen too high. But Bass didn't quit. He returned to work as a lawman and continued building his legend. By 1907, the Wild West was becoming tamer. Indian Territory became part of Oklahoma State. The days of outlaw gangs hiding in the wilderness were coming to an end. Railroads, telegraphs, and more organized law enforcement made it harder for criminals to escape justice. At 68 years old, Bass Reeves left the U.S. Marshals, but he wasn't ready to retire. Despite his age and the kidney disease that was slowly killing him, he served 2 more years as a police officer in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Even when he walked a beat instead of riding across the territory, he commanded respect from everyone who met him. Finally, in 1909, illness forced him to retire. His kidney disease, called Bright's disease, had grown worse. He spent his last months with his family, perhaps telling stories of his adventures to his grandchildren. Bass Reeves died on January 12, 1910. His obituary called him a universally respected U.S. Deputy Marshal who was absolutely fearless and had known no master but duty. The local newspaper praised his long service and his dedication to justice. For too long, his story was forgotten. While white lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok became legends, Bass Reeves, who arrested far more criminals than either of them, was left out of history books and Hollywood movies. Perhaps America wasn't ready to accept that one of its greatest heroes was a former slave. But now, Bass Reeves is finally getting the recognition he deserves. Books have been written about him. Museums display his story. A statue of him stands in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And in 2023, a TV series called Lawman Bass Reeves brought his story to screens around the world. We just uncovered the legendary story of Bass Reeves, a lawman who brought justice to the wild frontier. But not all places found peace so easily. Next, we're diving into a very different kind of story, a place where darkness never left. Welcome to the Cecil Hotel, where the ghosts of crime still linger.